For decades, Ron Howard looked like Hollywood's most stable success story, a child star who survived fame, an Oscar-winning director, and a family man whose life seemed remarkably steady in an industry known for chaos. But behind that image were private struggles that very few people knew about, including terrifying threats made against his children, painful family regrets, and career moments that nearly broke him. Ron Howard's career began almost before he could talk. At just 18 months old, he appeared in the Western film Frontier Woman alongside his parents, Rance Howard and Gene Spiegel Howard. According to family stories, young Ron cried during a scene after a prop tomahawk was taken away from him moments before filming. No one knew it then, but that emotional moment marked the start of a career that would last more than 70 years. Unlike many child stars, Ron grew up in a family that understood show business. His father was an actor and writer, and his mother also pursued acting. They relocated to California so opportunities would be nearby, and Ron attended school in Burbank whenever he wasn't working on a television set. Still, his childhood looked very different from that of other kids his age. By age 5, he had already appeared in shows like Dennis the Menace and The Twilight Zone. Then came the role that changed everything. On The Andy Griffith Show, Ron played Opie Taylor, the son of Sheriff Andy Taylor, a role that made him one of the most recognizable children in America. To audiences, the show seemed warm and simple. But behind the scenes, Ron was absorbing lessons that would shape the rest of his life. Andy Griffith became far more than a TV father to him. Howard later credited him with teaching him storytelling, comic timing, rehearsal discipline, and the importance of authenticity in performance. Those lessons eventually became the foundation of his directing career. But success came at a price. While other kids spent their afternoons riding bikes and playing baseball, Ron spent his time on sets, in tutoring sessions, and following production schedules. He later described child stardom as a system that often left young performers feeling like failures once they reached adolescence, and he was beginning to feel those pressures himself. Things became even more complicated as he watched his younger brother, Clint Howard, find success of his own. Ron openly admitted he sometimes felt jealous of Clint, believing his brother was more outgoing, athletic, and confident than he was. Despite already being famous, Ron struggled with insecurities that few people ever saw. By the time Ron landed the role of Richie Cunningham, he was no longer the little boy America remembered from the Andy Griffith Show. He was stepping into adulthood, trying to prove he could survive the transition that had derailed so many former child stars. At first, Happy Days seemed like the perfect opportunity. The series quickly became one of television's biggest hits, with Richie positioned as the central character around whom the story revolved. But as the show's popularity exploded, something unexpected happened. Audiences became obsessed with another character. Henry Winkler's Fonzie was originally meant to be a supporting role, but viewers couldn't get enough of him. Week after week, Fonzie got more screen time, his leather-jacketed image flooded merchandise shelves, fans copied his style, and the media couldn't stop talking about him. Howard later admitted he was fully aware of what was happening. He watched the show's balance shift away from Richie and toward Fonzie. What made it harder was that Howard genuinely liked Winkler. The two had a strong friendship, both on and off set, and there was no personal rivalry. The struggle was entirely internal. Howard felt the pressure mounting while keeping a smile on in public. In later interviews and in his memoir, The Boys, he revealed that he kept much of that anxiety bottled up. The stress eventually took a physical toll. He developed eczema, especially around his eyes, and noticed alarming hair loss. Baldness ran in his family, but Howard believed the stress sped up the process dramatically. The situation grew even more intense when ABC reportedly considered renaming the show to put Fonzie at its center, a change that would have transformed the entire identity of the series. Fortunately, Howard pushed back against the idea, and creator Gary Marshall did too. The title stayed the same, but the experience left a lasting mark on Howard. For the first time, he understood how quickly fame could shift in Hollywood and how little control actors often have over their own careers. While many performers would have fought harder to stay in the spotlight, Howard took a different path. Instead of competing for attention, he started looking beyond it. Years earlier, as a kid, he had already experimented with filmmaking, making homemade movies with his brother Clint. Now that old interest returned with new urgency. Acting no longer felt like enough. He wanted creative control, and he wanted to shape stories rather than just appear in them. That desire grew stronger every season. While audiences watched Richie Cunningham navigate life in Milwaukee, Howard was quietly studying directors, camera placement, editing choices, and production logistics. He paid close attention to everything happening behind the scenes. By the late 70s, he was already preparing for a future few people could imagine yet. While Ron Howard was building one of the most successful directing careers in Hollywood, his greatest source of pride was never a movie, it was his family. He and Cheryl Howard had married while still young, long before he became an Oscar-winning filmmaker. Unlike so many celebrity marriages that collapsed under the weight of fame, theirs lasted. Together, they raised 4 children, including future actress Bryce Dallas Howard. From the outside, their family life looked remarkably stable. But behind the scenes, there was a period when everything they valued suddenly felt at risk. At the height of Howard's fame, his family became the target of kidnapping threats aimed at his children, one of the most frightening episodes of his life. Howard later described it as deeply disturbing, explaining that federal authorities got involved once law enforcement learned of the potential danger. According to Howard, the FBI actively investigated the threats, and once the suspects realized authorities had been alerted, they reportedly fled the state. But for Ron and Cheryl, the damage was already done. The fear didn't simply vanish because the suspects had left. The family suddenly found themselves in a world where normal routines could no longer be taken for granted. Security became part of daily life. Every phone call felt suspicious. Every unfamiliar face caused anxiety. The people responsible were never caught, meaning there was never any real sense of closure. Years later, Bryce Dallas Howard spoke publicly about that terrifying time. As the oldest child, she understood more than her younger siblings did. She remembered the confusion of suddenly not being able to contact friends without fully understanding why, and recalled moments when the family had to leave their home and go through security measures that felt overwhelming for a child. Looking back, Bryce called the whole experience terrifying. For Ron Howard, the emotional impact lasted far longer than the public ever realized. Like many artists, he processed those emotions through his work. Around that same time, he was preparing to direct Ransom, the story of a wealthy father whose son is kidnapped. The film wasn't based on his personal experience. The screenplay had its own origins, but Howard admitted the emotions surrounding the project felt deeply personal, because he understood firsthand the fear at its core. When Mel Gibson's character desperately fought to save his child, Howard wasn't directing an abstract thriller. He was drawing on feelings he had actually lived through. The terror of imagining harm coming to your children was no longer something he needed to imagine. That emotional connection helped shape one of the most successful films of his career, which went on to become one of the year's highest-grossing movies. By the early 90s, Ron Howard had achieved something very few former child stars ever do. He was no longer seen as an actor trying to become a director. He was a director. Studios trusted him with major productions, big budgets, and some of Hollywood's biggest stars. Films like Backdraft had proven he could handle complex productions, and bigger opportunities kept coming. From a professional standpoint, everything seemed to be going exactly to plan. But success came with a cost Howard wouldn't fully understand until years later. In 1991, his daughter Jocelyn was born. Around the same time, Howard took on a major directing project that required him to spend months overseas. Production of Far and Away took him to Ireland for roughly 6 months. For most filmmakers, that's simply part of the job. Big productions often mean long stretches away from home, and Howard, having worked his whole life, understood those sacrifices. What he didn't expect was how deeply those months would affect him emotionally. When filming finally wrapped and he returned home, he discovered something that left a lasting impact. His children had changed dramatically while he was away. Jocelyn was no longer the baby he had left behind. Bryce had kept growing and developing without him there to see it. And Cheryl had carried the weight of parenting largely on her own while he pursued another career milestone thousands of miles away. That realization hit Howard harder than any professional setback ever had. Movies could succeed or fail, awards could be won or lost. None of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was the time that could never be gotten back. Unlike a film production, there was no second take in real life. Howard has spoken openly about how deeply that experience affected him, forcing him to reevaluate his priorities and rethink what success actually meant. For years, he had chased opportunities, believing that providing for his family and building an incredible career were inseparable goals. Suddenly, he understood that achievement could also create distance from the very people he was working so hard to support. After that experience, he made himself a promise. He would be far more careful about taking on projects requiring long separations from home. He couldn't always keep that promise perfectly, but the lesson stayed with him for the rest of his career. Years later, another family-related regret surfaced. Howard admitted he may have unintentionally pushed Bryce Dallas Howard toward acting before she was ready to make that choice herself. When Bryce was very young, he directed a school play she was in, viewing it at the time as a harmless way to support his daughter. Looking back, he worried he might have nudged her toward the entertainment industry too soon. Bryce ultimately built an impressive career on her own terms, becoming one of Hollywood's most successful actresses, but Howard still later apologized to her for any pressure he may have unknowingly created. The conversation reflected something that had grown increasingly important to him with age, understanding the difference between guiding someone and directing their life. Family struggles didn't end there. During the 80s and early 90s, his younger brother Clint battled serious addiction to alcohol and cocaine. Clint had also grown up in Hollywood, but his experience was very different. While Ron's career kept rising, Clint often felt overlooked and trapped in his brother's shadow. Eventually, the situation reached a breaking point. Ron confronted his brother directly and made clear that something had to change. According to both brothers, Ron gave him a tough ultimatum: get help or risk losing the relationship. Clint chose recovery. Years later, the two brothers spoke openly about that painful chapter in their memoir, The Boys. As Ron Howard entered the later chapters of his career, he faced a reality that eventually comes for everyone. Success couldn't shield him from loss. Awards couldn't stop time, and no amount of professional achievement could prepare him to say goodbye to the people who shaped his life. One of the most devastating losses came in 2000 when his mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, died at age 73. She had supported both Ron and Clint from the very beginning, helping guide them through the unpredictable world of child stardom. Even after her sons became successful, she kept acting, appearing in films and television projects. Her death marked the end of an era for the Howard family. The pain returned years later with the loss of his father, Rance Howard. More than just a parent, Rance had been one of Ron's closest creative partners, appearing in numerous films his son directed, including Splash, Apollo 13, and A Beautiful Mind. Long before Hollywood saw Ron as a major filmmaker, Rance believed in him.